When I told my daughter I'd lost everything, that the market crash had wiped out my savings, she didn't hug me. She asked if I'd already canceled the gardener. That's the line that still cuts the deepest. Because in that moment, standing under the golden light of my own dining room, the house I designed, the house where her mother once sang while setting the table, I realized love could sound polite and still be hollow. My name is Edward Langford, 72 years old. For 45 years, I was an architect of luxury resorts, hotels, the kind of places where marble never meets dust. I built homes for other people's dreams, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that my own family might see me as one more project to acquire. After my wife Margaret passed 5 years ago, this Charleston mansion became both a temple and a tomb. Every window still smelled faintly of her lavender polish. Every step across the parquet floor echoed a memory I wasn't ready to let go of. But lately, something else had begun to echo: my daughter's growing interest in simplifying my lifestyle. At first, it was innocent, "Dad, you shouldn't live alone in such a big place." Then practical, "You could sell the estate, move somewhere easier to manage." And finally, transactional. "If you sold now, the market's strong. Martin could handle everything." Martin, my son-in-law, slick, handsome, always smiling like a man with a closing deal. He sold million-dollar homes to people who barely liked each other, the kind who call you sir when they're taking something from you. So I decided to test them, to see what survived when the money disappeared. That night, over roast chicken and Rebecca's favorite wine, I said it as calmly as if I were discussing the weather. The market hit me hard. I lost nearly everything. My pension barely covers $1,500 a month. The silence was surgical. Rebecca's fork froze mid-air. Martin's wine glass stopped an inch from his lips. Then came the first question. Not, "Are you okay?" or "Do you need help, but is the house fully paid off?" I watched their faces like a scientist studying a specimen. Rebecca's eyes darted toward the antique clock on the mantel. She'd always loved that clock. Martin leaned forward, concern painted carefully across his features, but his fingers tapped an invisible calculator on the table. "Dad," he began smoothly, "if things are tight, we could help you transition. Maybe list the property discreetly." "I've got buyers looking for historical estates," Rebecca chimed in too quickly. "It might be time to downsize." "You don't need all this space." Her tone carried sympathy, the way perfume carries alcohol, pleasant on the surface, toxic when inhaled too long. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider their kindness. "Maybe you're right." They looked relieved, as if the problem was already half solved. But as I sat there pushing cold chicken around my plate, I felt the house around me change. The portraits on the wall, the family photos that once watched over us like gentle witnesses, now felt like silent judges asking, "How long have you ignored what's been growing under your roof?" After dinner, they left with promises to research options. I stayed in the quiet, the ticking of that clock louder than ever. I poured a small glass of bourbon, Margaret's favorite, and stared at my reflection in the window. The old man looking back wasn't broken. He was calculating. If they wanted to measure love in dollars, I would give them a balance sheet. But I still whispered before bed, "Lord, don't let me lose faith before the truth appears." Before we continue, let me know in the comments, where are you watching this story from? I'd love to know who's listening while I tell you what happened next. The next morning, Rebecca showed up at my house unannounced. She'd brought croissants and that bright, polished smile she used to win design clients. the kind that looked warm from a distance but never quite reached her eyes. "Dad," she said, setting the pastries on the marble counter. "I couldn't sleep last night thinking about what you told us." I leaned on my cane, pretending to be the fragile man they now imagined. "You don't need to worry. I've managed worse." "Oh, but you shouldn't have to manage," she insisted. "You should enjoy your retirement. You've worked so hard all your life. Let Martin and me take care of things for a while." She opened her leather portfolio, and inside were printouts, spreadsheets, property estimates, tax evaluations. My daughter, the girl who once collected seashells and doodled in the sand, now came to her father's home armed with market analytics. "See here," she said, tapping the page with a French manicured finger. "The property value has peaked. If we sell this place now, you'd still have enough to buy a smaller home and invest the rest." The word invest landed like a stone in my stomach, and she added Martin already spoke with a client who might be interested. Just hypothetically, of course. Hypothetically, a word people use when they've already made up their minds. I smiled faintly. "That's thoughtful of you, sweetheart. But this house is all I have left of your mother." Rebecca's tone softened just enough to be convincing. "I know. But Mom wouldn't want you struggling. Think of it this way, you'd have fewer worries, and we'd make sure everything's handled right." Handled right? I could hear Martin in that phrase, his vocabulary of control, his salesman's polish rubbing off on my daughter's voice. I poured her coffee just as I used to when she was a teenager, studying late at the kitchen table. The smell of it, rich and familiar, nearly broke me. "Do you remember," I asked quietly, "when you and your mother used to plant roses out back? You'd spend hours getting mud on your shoes, and she'd scold you for ruining your dress." Rebecca blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "Of course I do. She always said every garden needs roots," I said, "and that pulling them up for convenience destroys more than it saves." For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes, recognition, maybe guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She smiled, that perfect client-ready smile again. "You've always been sentimental, Dad. That's what makes you special." I could almost hear the unspoken words behind it, and vulnerable. She glanced around the kitchen, her gaze lingering on the framed photo of Margaret beside the window. My wife's smile frozen forever in sunlight. Then she straightened her posture and closed her folder. "Well," she said briskly, "Martin will stop by later. He wants to discuss some options for you." Options. Another word that really meant control. When she left, the air felt colder, as if her perfume had replaced the oxygen. I walked to the window and watched her get into that silver Range Rover, the one she'd bought on credit she couldn't afford. She looked back at the house once the way a broker studies property before listing it. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a quiet, simmering realization my daughter wasn't helping me plan for the future. She was helping herself to it. The sun was slipping behind the magnolia trees when I made my way to the small chapel at the edge of the estate. It was Margaret's refuge, a place of stillness built from salvaged wood and memory. I knelt where her candle still burned, its wax puddled like time melting. "Lord," I whispered, "help me see clearly without bitterness. Help me hold my ground without losing my soul." A single beam of late light cut through the stained glass and fell on Margaret's old rosary resting on the altar. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady again. Some wars, I realized, aren't fought with anger. They're fought with patience and faith. It started with the sound of voices where there shouldn't have been any. That Tuesday morning, I was supposed to be at my cardiology checkup downtown, but the clinic had called to reschedule. And instead of sitting in a waiting room filled with old men and magazines about cholesterol, I drove back home early, a decision that would change everything. As I turned onto the gravel driveway, I saw a silver Mercedes parked beside my daughter's SUV. The engine was still warm. The front door stood slightly open, and laughter drifted down the hallway. Laughter that didn't belong in a house I built with my own hands. I stepped inside quietly, my shoes sinking into the Persian rug Margaret had chosen 40 years ago. Voices came from the living room. I stopped before the doorway. 4 bedrooms, original architecture, coastal view, a woman's voice said. It'll sell itself. Then Martin's unmistakable tone, smooth as oil. Exactly. My father-in-law can't manage the upkeep anymore. We're looking at a private deal off-market, no publicity. You know how these old Southern families are proud private. My blood went cold. He wasn't describing a hypothetical scenario anymore. He was pitching my home like a product. The woman, another agent I guessed, clicked her pen. You're saying it's confirmed for sale? Martin hesitated just long enough to lie smoothly. We're finalizing details this week. His daughter has full authorization. Rebecca. I stepped backward, the floorboard creaking under my weight. Their conversation stopped. Martin's footsteps moved closer. I slipped down the side hallway, heart pounding, and exited through the garden door before he reached the foyer. From the patio, I could still hear muffled talk through the open windows. Phrases cut through the wind like shards of glass. 3.5 million cash offer possible. Limited window before inspection. That was enough. I drove straight to my office, the one room in this house no one but me ever touched. The drafting table still held my old blueprints. I slid open the bottom drawer and pulled out my recording device, a small digital unit I used during site inspections. Old habits die hard. Architects document everything. That night I sat in the shadows of the library and listened again as they came back unaware I was home. Rebecca's voice floated through the door. She's serious, Martin. The buyer wants to move fast. Dad can't handle paperwork. It's better if we sign for him. Martin's reply was calm, calculated. Don't worry. We'll make it sound like it's for his benefit, tax simplification, reduced liability, that sort of thing. He'll thank us when it's done. I pressed record. Every word etched itself into the little machine like nails hammered into a coffin, theirs not mine. When they finally left, the house sank into silence again, heavy and sour. I poured myself a glass of water, but it tasted like metal. My hands trembled as I dialed the one person I knew could help. Samuel Pierce, a firm voice, answered on the second ring. Sam, it's Edward Langford. There was a pause. It's been a long time, Ed. What's going on? I think my son-in-law is trying to sell my house behind my back. Samuel exhaled slowly. Then you'd better start collecting proof. And Ed, don't confront them yet. People who think they're clever make the best mistakes when no one stops them. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Understood. He continued. If you've got a voice recorder, use it. Keep everything documented. And Ed, don't let anger write your next move. Precision wins cases, not fury. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the portraits on the far wall, Margaret in her wedding dress, Rebecca as a baby in her arms. It felt obscene that those same eyes, once full of innocence, now looked at me through the lens of opportunity. At midnight, I opened the curtains. Outside, the garden lamps glowed faintly over the fountain Margaret had loved. Water still ran clear. Some things at least remained pure. I switched off the recorder and placed it gently on my desk. Tomorrow I'd let them believe I was still the frail old man with shaky hands. But every whisper they left in these halls would soon become my weapon. The next weekend, Rebecca called and said she and Martin wanted to come by for a family dinner. Her voice sounded too cheerful, too rehearsed, like someone preparing to close a deal rather than share a meal. I agreed, of course. The best way to catch predators is to let them think they're hunting freely. That Saturday evening, I set the table myself, Margaret's old silver, the porcelain with blue trim, the crystal glasses that caught light like rain. Every object in this house held memory, and I wanted those memories to watch what was about to unfold. When they arrived, Rebecca wore a cream suit and carried a thick envelope. Martin followed, all smiles and cologne. "Evening, Ed. You're looking sharp," he said, as if charm could disguise the scent of manipulation. We sat down, exchanged small talk about weather, neighbors, the new restaurant downtown. Then, inevitably, Martin cleared his throat, the sound of business about to begin. "So, Dad," he said smoothly, "Rebecca and I have been thinking about ways to make things easier for you. We spoke to a financial advisor. He thinks we should simplify your assets." Rebecca nodded earnestly. "We don't want you to worry about property taxes and maintenance. You deserve comfort." She reached into the envelope and pulled out a set of documents, freshly printed, crisp, official-looking. "This is just a temporary power of attorney," she said, "so we can handle the logistics of selling the house and investing the proceeds safely. Nothing binding long-term." I looked down at the papers. The header bore the logo of a law firm I knew well, except this wasn't a real power of attorney. It was a trap, one I'd already prepared. Earlier that week, my attorney Samuel had drafted an identical document, except his version was fictional, created purely for this moment. The signatures, the formatting, even the date, perfect replicas. But instead of granting authority, mine recorded their intent. Hidden in the legal jargon was a clause stating that any attempt to use this document for personal financial gain constituted fraud under state law. I slid the papers toward me, feigning confusion. "So I sign here," Rebecca smiled. "Yes, Dad. It just says we can act on your behalf to sell the property." Martin added, "We'll make sure every penny goes where it should." I signed with a steady hand, old but deliberate. "There," I said, handing the pen back. "I trust you both know what's best." Rebecca's smile widened. "Of course we do." They stayed another hour pretending to enjoy dessert, talking about family vacations that would never happen. When they left, Martin shook my hand longer than usual. "You're doing the right thing," he said. The moment the door closed, I pressed the button on the recorder hidden under the table. Their voices were crystal clear. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. "We'll start reviewing offers tomorrow." So exciting. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I forwarded the message to Samuel with a short note, Phase 1 complete. Sunday morning brought an email from Martin's business account. He'd already contacted 3 buyers. One reply even congratulated him on securing exclusive rights to the Langford property. It was all there in writing. I printed every document, slid them into a folder labeled Evidence, and placed it beside the recorder. It felt like watching the blueprint of their own downfall take shape line by line. By evening, the sky had turned the color of bruised gold. I sat on the back porch with a cup of black coffee listening to the crickets. Margaret used to hum to them, saying they were the sound of honesty in the dark. Honesty, a word that no longer belonged in my daughter's vocabulary. Still, I whispered her name into the night. Rebecca, you have no idea what storm you just built. I wasn't angry anymore. I was something far more dangerous, patient. If you're still following this story, type 1 in the comments. Because from here on, the truth isn't just about money. It's about betrayal that money can't buy back. It happened 3 days later on a humid Thursday afternoon, the kind where Charleston's air feels like warm silk and secrets hang heavier than rain. I was supposed to be at a luncheon hosted by the Heritage Society, an event Martin himself had encouraged me to attend. "Good for your mood, Dad," he'd said with that salesman's smile. I went, stayed an hour, then quietly slipped away before dessert. When I pulled up to the house, 3 luxury SUVs were parked in the driveway. One was Martin's, the others I didn't recognize. The iron gates stood open. Voices and footsteps echoed through my own front door. I entered silently, the way one walks into a church, desecrated. Laughter spilled from the grand foyer, strangers in tailored suits, heels clicking against marble, champagne flutes clinking. A tall man in a linen blazer gestured toward my staircase. Original banister, right, beautiful craftsmanship. Shame they don't build like this anymore. Martin's voice followed smoothly. Custom design, hand-carved oak. My father-in-law was an architect. This house is practically a work of art. But it's time to pass it on to someone who'll appreciate it. I froze. My pulse was steady, but my breath felt razor thin. One of the guests, a woman dripping with jewelry, asked, "And he's fine with the sale?" Rebecca, standing near the fireplace, smiled, that same polished smile she'd learned from him. "Oh yes, he trusts us completely. We handle everything now." I stepped forward. The entire room turned. The silence that followed felt like thunder before lightning. I'm glad to hear that I said evenly, because I was starting to wonder whether my trust was misplaced. Rebecca's face drained of color. "Dad, I thought you were at the luncheon." "I was," I said, "but I wanted to come home. You see, I don't recall listing my house for sale." Martin chuckled awkwardly. "We were just showing some friends around, that's all." Friends, I looked at the guests, 5 total, all frozen mid-step, unsure whether to stay or flee. "Are these your poker friends or your real estate clients?" Rebecca's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "It's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think." I walked slowly to the dining table where the fake power of attorney papers had been lying. I picked them up, flipping through the pages. "This document, the one you told me, was temporary. You tried to file it this morning. My lawyer received a notification from the clerk's office." Martin's confident smile cracked. "That's ridiculous, don't I?" interrupted sharply. "I have the recordings, the texts, the emails, every word you said about selling this house while pretending to protect me." The guests began to edge toward the door. Rebecca whispered, "Please don't make a scene." I laughed, a low, tired sound. "Rebecca, my entire life has been one long design. Every line, every column, every corner. You think I wouldn't notice when something in my own foundation starts to rot?" She looked at me, eyes shining with tears that came too late to matter. "Dad, I was trying to help. We were desperate. Desperate people ask for help," I said quietly. They don't forge signatures and auction off their father's memories for commission. Martin stepped forward, his jaw tight. You can't prove intent. This will only embarrass you. I took my phone out, pressed play. His own voice filled the room. We'll make it sound like it's for his benefit, tax simplification, reduced liability. The color drained from his face. The guests murmured, horrified. One of them muttered, I think we should go. Rebecca reached out as if to touch my arm. Please, Dad, don't do this. I stepped back. You already did. For a long moment, no one moved. Then finally, Martin exhaled and said the one sentence that sealed his fate. You wouldn't dare go public with this. I looked him straight in the eye. I don't need to. The law will do that for me. I turned and walked out, leaving them standing in the ruins of their own scheme, strangers surrounded by the echoes of a home they'd tried to sell from under me. Outside, thunder rolled in from the coast. The first drops of rain hit the stone steps as I locked the front door behind me, this time from the inside. The auction was over. The price had been revealed. And it wasn't the house that was for sale, it was their souls. That night, the storm didn't stop. Rain lashed the windows like anger made visible. The magnolia trees outside bent under the wind, their white blooms scattering like torn pages. I sat alone in my study, the house still trembling from what had happened earlier. Every creak in the floorboards felt like the ghosts of Margaret's footsteps, reminders of what this home once meant before greed polluted its air. The phone rang twice before I picked up. Dad Rebecca's voice came through small and shaking. We need to talk. I could hear Martin's voice in the background, low and sharp, like a hiss. I pictured him pacing behind her, rehearsing lines, the way a criminal prepares an alibi. Talk, I said flatly. You humiliated us, she whispered. Those people tonight were potential investors. Do you have any idea how that makes us look like liars, I said, which is exactly what you were. There was silence, heavy, brittle silence. Then Martin's voice cut in hard and deliberate. You can drop the act, old man. You're not as sharp as you think. We were trying to help you before you lose everything to bad judgment. But if you push this, I'll tell everyone you're losing your mind. I laughed softly, not cruelly, but with the kind of weary disbelief only betrayal can teach. So that's your next play, to call me senile. Martin didn't answer. Rebecca tried to soften it. Dad, please, you've been under so much stress. Since Mom died, you've been different. Forgetful, withdrawn. Maybe people will believe I cut her off. Believe what? That I'm too confused to know my own house is being stolen. Stop saying stolen, she cried. You're twisting everything. I'm not twisting a thing, I said quietly. You forged my name. You brought strangers into my home. You tried to sell it. And when that failed, you turned to lies. The truth doesn't bend, Rebecca, only people do. Martin snapped. This conversation's over. The line went dead. I sat there for a while, staring at the phone, listening to the storm rage beyond the windows. It wasn't just the weather breaking. It was everything, the illusion of family, the fragile idea that blood guarantees loyalty. At some point, I stood and walked to the fireplace. Margaret's portrait hung above it, her eyes calm and steady as ever. How did you know? I murmured. How did you always see through people before they hurt you? Of course she didn't answer, but I remembered her words from years ago, whispered, after we'd attended a friend's funeral. The hardest part of growing old isn't losing people you love. It's realizing who still deserves your love. I poured myself a drink, not to forget, but to stay awake. My lawyer Samuel had warned me this would get ugly before it got clean. He was right, and the ugliness was only beginning. Just after midnight, the power flickered out. I lit one of Margaret's candles, the ones that smelled faintly of rosemary and smoke, and carried it through the halls. The house looked different in candlelight, like a church without worshippers. When I reached the small chapel at the back, I stopped. The candlelight shimmered across the wooden cross above the altar. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I whispered, "Lord, I've built walls and bridges my whole life, but I don't know how to rebuild a family. If I'm to stand alone, give me the strength to stand with grace. And if there's still a spark of goodness left in them, let it burn away their greed before it destroys them completely." The thunder rolled again, but softer this time, as if the storm itself had heard. I left the candle burning on the altar and walked back toward my study. The house was quiet now, peaceful even. I realized something important, that peace doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it means readiness, because the war my daughter and her husband had started wasn't over. It had just found a new battlefield, one made of lies, law, and faith. And this time I wouldn't be the one caught unprepared. Monday arrived with the kind of quiet that usually precedes disaster or deliverance. The rain had washed the city clean, but my thoughts were still muddy. By noon, I was sitting across from Samuel Pierce in his oak-paneled office downtown, a place that smelled like old law books and unspoken truths. Samuel was my oldest friend. We'd built houses together back in the 80s before he traded blueprints for court briefs. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything from the fake document to the guests in my living room, to Martin's threat about calling me senile. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "They tried to sell your house using forged paperwork," he said slowly, "then threatened to smear your reputation if you resisted. That's elder exploitation and attempted fraud." I nodded, my voice steady. "Can we prove it?" He smiled faintly, that lawyer's half grin of someone who already sees the path ahead. "You've done half the work for me. The recordings, the emails, the signed fake documents, they've built their own gallows." He turned toward his assistant. "Get the recorder and a copy of the statute on elder financial abuse. Then to me, we'll start with a cease and desist letter. Once they realize the legal language, they'll panic. But that's just the opening act." I leaned forward. "And the second act exposure," Samuel said simply. "We file a civil suit for fraud and coercion. We alert the Real Estate Commission about Martin's behavior. His license depends on his reputation. We shake the ground they walk on until they have nowhere to stand." There was something about hearing it in his voice, calm, methodical, inevitable, that brought back the old engineer in me. The part that understood stress, structure, pressure points. Every bridge had a weakness. So did every scheme. Samuel handed me a pen. "Sign this affidavit. It verifies the evidence chain and authorizes me to act on your behalf." I signed without hesitation. "No shaking hands this time. You understand," he continued, "once we start, there's no going back. They'll double down, spread lies, maybe even attack you publicly." "They already did," I said quietly. "Now it's my turn." He nodded approvingly. "Then we'll start with the commission. If Martin forged documents, his career is over before the court date even arrives." That night, I returned home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not happy happiness was too far a concept, but clear. focused. I sat at my drafting table, the same one where I'd once drawn the curve of bridges over Carolina rivers, and laid out my own blueprints of justice. The audio recordings, the texts, the emails, the counterfeit power of attorney. Every piece was labeled time-stamped airtight. By midnight, the fax machine hummed as Samuel's letters went out, one to the real estate licensing board, one to the county clerk, one directly to Rebecca and Martin. Each envelope carried a line that would chill any rational mind. You are hereby notified of formal allegations of fraud, coercion, and elder exploitation. When I sealed the last envelope, I realized my hands weren't trembling anymore. Outside, the moon cut a silver line across the garden pond. I thought of Margaret, how she used to say every storm was just God's way of rearranging the sky. She'd be proud of this kind of storm. The clean kind. The kind that wipes away rot. 2 days later, my phone rang. Samuel's voice was calm but sharp. The board has acknowledged our complaint. They're opening a formal investigation into Martin's conduct. Apparently, this isn't his first questionable deal. I almost smiled. So the foundation's already cracking. Oh, it's more than that, he said. A local journalist reached out this morning. Someone leaked the investigation. It might hit the papers. For the first time, I didn't feel dread. I felt something closer to poetic justice. If Martin had spent his life selling appearances, then maybe public humiliation was the only currency he understood. Before hanging up, Samuel added, "Stay quiet, Ed. Let the law speak for you. When people lie loud, truth doesn't have to shout." That night, I poured 2 glasses of bourbon. One for me, one for Margaret's memory. To storms, I said aloud. To justice that takes its time. The glass clinked softly against hers on the mantel. Outside, lightning flashed once, not angry but certain. The courtroom smelled faintly of oak polish and fear. It was the first Monday of spring sunlight cutting clean through the tall windows of Charleston County Courthouse, that same light I'd seen shining on cathedral floors when I was a young architect. Only this time it wasn't falling on stone arches. It was falling on my daughter and her husband. Rebecca sat 2 tables away, face pale, and powdered her fingers, twisting the pearl bracelet Margaret had left her. Martin sat beside her, lips, tight, jaw clamped shut, like a man who finally realized charm couldn't bargain with the law. My attorney, Samuel Pierce, stood beside me, calm, gray-haired eyes like tempered steel. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Evelyn Grant entered, the kind of woman whose presence commanded silence without needing to ask for it. "Langford versus Morgan," she announced, glancing at the case file. "Civil action alleging fraud, coercion, and elder exploitation." "Mr. Pierce, your opening statement." Samuel stepped forward with the quiet confidence of a man who'd already read the ending. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a story of trust, the kind a father places in his own blood. It is also a story of greed, the kind that disguises itself as concern." He paused, letting the words settle. "The defendants attempted to sell Mr. Langford's home using forged authorization documents. When confronted, they threatened to discredit him publicly as senile. The evidence we present today is not speculation. It is recorded, signed, and time-stamped." He gestured toward the evidence table stacked neatly with binders, each labeled in precise handwriting, my handwriting. When it was Martin's attorney's turn, a younger man with an expensive suit and the expression of someone playing poker with bad cards, he began with practiced sympathy. "My clients acted out of love, not greed. They were trying to protect an aging parent from financial mismanagement. Judge Grant raised an eyebrow. By forging documents, the lawyer hesitated. It was a misunderstanding. Samuel's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then let's clarify the misunderstanding. He called me to the stand first. As I swore the oath, the courtroom lights felt like heat lamps. But my voice didn't waver. I described everything, the false story I'd told about losing my fortune, the shift in their tone, the fake documents, the evening they hosted strangers in my living room. Then Samuel played the recording, Martin's voice, smooth and unhurried. We'll make it sound like it's for his benefit, tax simplification, reduced liability. He'll thank us when it's done. The courtroom murmured. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. Martin's attorney tried to object, but the judge waved him off. The recording is admissible. Continue. Next, Samuel introduced the emails, the text messages, and finally the temporary power of attorney they'd signed. He directed the judge to the hidden clause Samuel had inserted, the one stating any attempt to use the document for personal gain would constitute fraud. Judge Grant read it, then looked at Martin. Did you read this before you signed it? Martin swallowed. I trusted Rebecca's father. So the judge said dryly, You're claiming your defense is trust. The courtroom chuckled softly. Rebecca's turn came next. She stood trembling, mascara streaking her cheeks. I didn't mean to hurt him, she whispered. Martin said it was just a formality. I thought it was helping. Her voice cracked. He's my father. Samuel didn't attack her. He simply asked, When you realized what your husband planned, why didn't you stop him? Rebecca's silence said more than any answer could. By mid-afternoon, the judge had heard enough. She removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose, and spoke in that quiet tone judges use before delivering a blow. This court finds the defendants, Martin and Rebecca Morgan, liable for fraud, coercion, and defamation of character. Mr. Martin Morgan is to be reported to the State Real Estate Commission for ethical violations. Both defendants will pay compensatory damages of $20,000 plus attorney fees. Her gaze softened when it turned toward me. Mr. Langford, the law can't fix broken families, but today it can remind the world that age doesn't mean weakness. The gavel struck. One sharp sound, clean, final, irreversible. Martin stood frozen. Rebecca crumpled into her chair, sobbing quietly. Samuel gathered our papers calmly. Justice Ed, he said under his breath, clean and built to last. Outside, the afternoon light had shifted softer now, almost forgiving. I stepped down the courthouse steps and drew a slow breath of spring air. The magnolias along the street were blooming again. For the first time in months, I noticed their scent. This was what justice smelled like, sharp at first, then sweet when it settled. 3 weeks passed after the verdict, and for the first time in a long while, the house was quiet in the right way. Not the hollow silence of betrayal, but the stillness of peace returning to a place that had fought too long. I spent those weeks tending Margaret's garden. The roses she'd planted were in their second bloom, stubborn as hope. Every morning, I trimmed the edges, replaced dead soil, watered the beds, and felt the weight of something inside me start to lift. Then one afternoon, as I was pruning the white camellias, the gate bell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Rebecca standing on the porch, pale, nervous, holding a small purse against her chest, like a shield. Beside her was Olivia, my 10-year-old granddaughter, wearing a sky blue dress that fluttered in the breeze. I hadn't seen either of them since that awful night of the auction. When I opened the door, Olivia smiled shyly. "Hi, Grandpa. Mom said I could come see the swing." Rebecca's voice trembled. "May we come in?" For a moment, I didn't answer. My heart knew forgiveness before my mind did, but trust was slower to move. Finally, I stepped aside. "Yes, come in." The air inside the house felt different the moment they crossed the threshold, lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves exhaled. Rebecca glanced around, as though the furniture might accuse her. The portraits on the wall, the scent of polished wood, everything was the same except her. She looked smaller now, stripped of the confidence she used to wear like armor. "I brought something," she said softly, pulling an envelope from her purse. "It's the first payment." I looked down. A cashier's check, $2,000 made out to me. "You didn't have to bring it in person," I said. "Yes, I did." Her voice broke. "I couldn't just mail it like a bill. This isn't a debt I can pay with money." I gestured to the sofa. She sat carefully, hands clasped in her lap. Olivia wandered toward the window, tracing the sunlight on the glass. Rebecca took a deep breath. "Dad, I've spent every day since the trial thinking about what I did, not just the papers or the lies or letting Martin lead me, but what I almost lost." She swallowed hard. "I told myself I was protecting you, but really I was protecting our lifestyle, the image, the convenience, the comfort. When you told me you were broke, something ugly woke up inside me. I didn't see my father. I saw an inconvenience." Her words came out like stones dropping into deep water one by one. "When did you realize?" I asked quietly. "The day after court," she said. "When Olivia asked why you didn't come to her recital. I told her you were busy, and she said, 'No, Grandpa's just mad at us.' And I realized she was right. You had every reason to be." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, the same way she used to as a child, after falling off her bike. "I've left Martin, for good. He's not the man I thought he was. The commission suspended his license, and the debts are worse than I knew. I'm sorry, Rebecca," I said, and I meant it. Not for her mistakes, but for the part of me that hadn't seen how lost she'd been all along. She nodded, shoulders shaking. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want Olivia to know her grandfather. And if you can't ever trust me again, I'll understand." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly. Outside, the garden shimmered in sunlight, and I could hear the faint creak of the swing Margaret and I built years ago. I finally stood, walked to the window, and looked at my granddaughter pushing herself with small, determined kicks. Her laughter carried through the open pane, pure, effortless healing. "Rebecca," I said slowly, "do you remember what your mother told you when you were 16 and you stole from her purse?" She looked up, surprised eyes wet. She said, "Trust takes time to rebuild, but it can be rebuilt if both people want it enough." I nodded. "Do you still believe that?" She took a trembling breath. "Yes." "Then let's start with that." Her tears fell freely now, not the hysterical kind from guilt, but the quiet kind that come when a dam finally breaks. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. I turned toward the door. "Go help your daughter on the swing. She shouldn't be flying alone." Rebecca hesitated only a moment before stepping outside barefoot on the warm stone path. Olivia squealed with laughter as her mother joined her. The sound filled the yard like music off-key, messy reel. I stood by the window watching them and felt something unclench deep inside my chest. The storm had finally passed. The following Sunday, the morning air in Charleston carried the scent of salt and magnolia. The kind of air Margaret used to call forgiving weather, soft, new, full of second chances. Rebecca and Olivia came again that day. No makeup, no guarded smiles, just sunlight and sincerity. They helped me replant the rose bush that had died during the storm, the same one Margaret planted on our first anniversary. Its roots had been torn, but not gone. I told them that meant it still had a chance. That was the lesson of the past months, really. Roots can heal even when branches break. As we worked, Rebecca glanced up. "I went back to church last week," she said quietly. "I hadn't prayed in years, but I sat there and realized I wasn't asking for money or success. I just asked God to let you answer the door when I knocked." I looked at her hands, soil under the nails, sweat on her brow. She wasn't the polished woman from before. She looked real again. Sometimes I said softly, "Faith isn't about believing things will go right. It's about staying when everything goes wrong." She nodded, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to braid Margaret's hair on lazy Sunday mornings. After we finished, Olivia ran toward the porch swing, that old wooden seat that had survived every storm this house had ever seen. She jumped on and called out, "Grandpa, push me." I joined her, the swing creaking as it carried us forward and back like the rhythm of time forgiving itself. Higher she laughed, hair streaming in the wind. Rebecca stood nearby, smiling through tears. "I forgot how happy this house sounds when it's full," she whispered. "It remembers," I said. "Houses don't forget love. They just wait for it to come home again." For a while we said nothing more. The sunlight fell across Margaret's old bird bath where a single blue jay dipped its wings. The same one I'd seen the morning after the trial, as if God himself had sent it as a quiet reminder. You're not alone. Later, as Rebecca packed up to leave, she lingered at the doorway. "Dad, when Mom died, I lost more than her. I lost the version of me that still knew how to listen. I hope someday you'll see that I'm trying to find her again." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Trying is all faith ever asks for." She smiled, a small, uncertain smile, but honest. "I'll see you next Sunday. I'll keep the gate open," I said. When they drove off, I stayed in the garden. The afternoon light turned gold, the kind that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. I stood before Margaret's rose bush, now standing firm again, and whispered, "You were right, my love. Some things are worth rebuilding, even if the foundation's cracked." The wind moved gently through the leaves, and for a moment I swore I heard her voice in it. "You didn't lose them, Edward. You taught them." I closed my eyes and smiled. Not from pride, but peace. Because forgiveness, I realized, isn't weakness. It's strength refined by truth. And faith isn't the absence of doubt. It's the decision to love again, knowing how much it might cost. As the church bells from St. Michael's began to ring in the distance, I sat on the swing one last time and whispered a prayer, not for justice, but for gratitude. Gratitude for lessons learned, for roots that hold, and for the grace to start again. The sky glowed pale gold above the garden, a cathedral ceiling painted by mercy itself. And there beneath it, a man who had once been betrayed was learning how to live again. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to Brian Stories. Share your thoughts in the comments, tell us where you're listening from, and what forgiveness means to you. And remember, storms don't destroy everything. Sometimes they just wash the truth clean.